Imagine waking up one morning with the absolute certainty that every obstacle in your path is merely a stepping stone, that every limitation you've accepted about yourself is nothing more than a mental prison you've constructed with your own thoughts. What if I told you that the only thing standing between you and the life you've always dreamed of is not your circumstances, not your background, not your education, but simply the way you think about yourself and your possibilities? This isn't wishful thinking or empty motivation. This is the transformative truth that Orison Swett Marden discovered over a century ago, and it remains just as powerful today as it was then. In his groundbreaking work, He Can Who Thinks He Can, Marden presents a philosophy so fundamental yet so revolutionary that it has the power to reshape your entire existence. The premise is deceptively simple. Your thoughts create your reality. But don't let that simplicity fool you. Within these pages lies a comprehensive roadmap for personal transformation that addresses every aspect of human achievement, from career success to personal relationships, from physical health to spiritual fulfillment. Marden begins by establishing a truth that many people spend their entire lives resisting. We become what we think about most of the time. Your dominant thoughts are not just passive reflections of your reality, they are active creators of it. Every successful person who has ever lived has understood this principle, whether consciously or intuitively. They've grasped that the mind is not merely a recipient of experience but a powerful generator of circumstances. Consider the young person who grows up in poverty but refuses to accept poverty as their destiny. While their circumstances scream limitation, their thoughts whisper possibility. They see themselves graduating from university, starting a successful business, providing for their family in ways their parents never could. These aren't just daydreams. These are blueprints being drawn in the workshop of the mind. Every thought of success, every mental image of achievement, every moment spent visualizing a better future is actually rewiring the brain, creating new neural pathways that will eventually manifest as new behaviors, new decisions, and ultimately, new circumstances. Marden emphasizes that this isn't about ignoring reality or engaging in magical thinking. It's about understanding that what we call reality is far more fluid and responsive to our mental states than we've been led to believe. The person who thinks they can and the person who thinks they can't are both right, not because the universe is somehow reading their minds and granting wishes, but because their thoughts directly influence their actions, their persistence, their creativity, and their ability to recognize and seize opportunities. Throughout the book, Marden provides countless examples of individuals who transformed their lives through the power of thought. There's the story of the young clerk who was passed over for promotion repeatedly, not because he lacked ability, but because he carried himself with an air of defeat. He walked with slumped shoulders, spoke in uncertain tones, and approached his work with the energy of someone who expected failure. But then something shifted. He began to study successful people in his industry, and he noticed they all shared a common characteristic. They thought of themselves as successful before they actually were. They carried themselves with confidence, spoke with authority, and approached challenges with the expectation of victory. This clerk decided to conduct an experiment. He would spend 30 days thinking of himself as successful, regardless of his current circumstances. Every morning, before his feet touched the floor, he would spend 10 minutes visualizing himself as a successful executive, making important decisions, leading teams, contributing significantly to his company's growth. Throughout the day, whenever doubt crept in, he would consciously redirect his thoughts back to this vision of success. He began walking differently, speaking differently, and approaching his work differently, not because he was being fake or pretending, but because his changed thinking was naturally producing changed behavior. The results were remarkable. Within 3 months, he received the promotion he'd been seeking for years. Within a year, He was managing a department. Within 5 years, he was a vice president of the company. When asked about his transformation, he always credited that decision to change his thinking. He hadn't acquired new skills overnight, hadn't suddenly become more intelligent, hadn't received special favors. He had simply aligned his thoughts with his desired outcome, and everything else followed naturally. Marden is careful to explain that this principle works both ways. Just as positive, empowering thoughts create positive outcomes, negative, limiting thoughts create negative outcomes with equal reliability. The person who constantly thinks, "I can't, it's too hard, I'm not smart enough," or "people like me don't succeed," is programming their subconscious mind for failure just as surely as if they were deliberately sabotaging themselves. These thoughts become self-fulfilling prophecies, creating a lens through which they interpret every experience, filtering out evidence of their capability while amplifying every setback and limitation. One of the most powerful sections of the book deals with the concept of mental atmosphere. Marden explains that every person carries around them an invisible atmosphere created by their habitual thoughts. This atmosphere affects not only how they feel and act but also how others perceive and respond to them. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to bring energy and possibility into a room, while others seem to drain it? This isn't just about personality. It's about mental atmosphere. The person who habitually thinks thoughts of success, enthusiasm, and possibility radiates an atmosphere that attracts opportunities, supporters, and favorable circumstances. People want to work with them, invest in them, help them succeed. Conversely, the person who habitually thinks thoughts of defeat, resentment, and impossibility radiates an atmosphere that repels opportunities and alienates potential allies. It's not that the universe is playing favorites. It's that our mental atmosphere directly influences how we show up in the world and how the world responds to us. Marden illustrates this with the example of two salespeople selling identical products. The first approaches each potential customer with the thought, "They probably won't buy, the economy is bad," or "Our competitors have better prices." This mental atmosphere comes through in everything: their tone of voice, their body language, their inability to handle objections creatively. They make the sale occasionally, but only when they happen upon someone who was already predisposed to buy. The second salesperson approaches each potential customer with thoughts of service, value, and confidence. They think, "I'm about to help this person solve a problem. I'm offering tremendous value, and this person will be grateful they met me." This mental atmosphere also comes through in everything they do, and the results are dramatically different. They don't make every sale, nobody does, but their success rate is vastly higher, not because they're using tricks or manipulation, but because their mental atmosphere creates genuine connection and trust. The book delves deeply into the mechanics of how thought creates reality. Marden explains that our subconscious mind is like incredibly fertile soil. It will grow whatever seeds we plant in it, whether those seeds are thoughts of success or thoughts of failure. The subconscious doesn't judge or discriminate. It simply accepts what the conscious mind feeds it and works to make it real. This is why it's absolutely critical to become aware of our habitual thought patterns and take conscious control of what we're planting in our mental garden. Many people go through life as passive thinkers, allowing their minds to be bombarded by whatever thoughts happen to arise, whether from external circumstances, other people's opinions, or their own unchecked worries and fears. This is like leaving your garden unattended and then wondering why it's full of weeds instead of flowers. The conscious mind must become the vigilant gardener, constantly monitoring what's being planted in the subconscious and pulling out the weeds of negative thinking before they can take root. Marden provides practical techniques for taking control of your thoughts. One of the most powerful is the practice of systematic thought replacement. Whenever you catch yourself thinking a limiting thought, you don't just try to stop thinking it. You immediately replace it with an empowering thought. If you catch yourself thinking, "I'm not good at public speaking," you immediately replace it with, "I'm becoming more confident and effective as a speaker every day." If you think, "I'll never be financially secure," you replace it with, "I'm learning to create and manage wealth effectively." This isn't about lying to yourself or denying current reality. It's about directing your mental energy toward the reality you want to create rather than reinforcing the reality you want to escape. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a thought about current circumstances and a thought about desired circumstances. It simply responds to the dominant thought patterns you feed it. Over time, these new thought patterns become habitual, and your behavior, decisions, and circumstances naturally align with them. Another crucial concept Marden explores is the power of expectation. What we expect tends to happen, not through magic, but through a complex interplay of attention, interpretation, and action. When you expect success, you're alert to opportunities that support that expectation. When you expect failure, you're alert to obstacles that confirm that expectation. Two people can have identical experiences but interpret them completely differently based on their expectations. Consider someone interviewing for a job. If they expect rejection, they'll interpret every neutral expression from the interviewer as disapproval, every pause as disinterest, every challenging question as evidence they're not qualified. This interpretation creates anxiety, which affects their performance, which increases the likelihood of rejection, which confirms their original expectation. It's a vicious cycle, but if they expect success, they interpret the same neutral expressions as thoughtful consideration, the same pauses as careful evaluation, the same challenging questions as opportunities to demonstrate their capabilities. This interpretation creates confidence, which enhances their performance, which increases the likelihood of success, which confirms their original expectation. It's a virtuous cycle. The circumstances were identical, but the expectations created entirely different outcomes. Marden emphasizes that expecting success doesn't mean being surprised by challenges or assuming everything will come easily. It means maintaining an underlying conviction that you will ultimately succeed, regardless of the obstacles you encounter. This expectation creates resilience, creativity, and persistence, qualities that are absolutely essential for achievement in any field. The book also addresses the critical importance of mental images. Marden explains that the subconscious mind thinks in images, not words. When you constantly visualize yourself as successful, healthy, confident, and prosperous, you're providing your subconscious mind with a clear blueprint to work toward. The subconscious then begins to generate ideas, insights, and impulses that move you toward that mental image. This is why successful athletes spend so much time on mental rehearsal, visualizing perfect performances before they ever step onto the field. They're not just building confidence, they're actually programming their neuromuscular system to execute those movements. The same principle applies to any area of life. The entrepreneur who regularly visualizes their business thriving, serving thousands of satisfied customers, and generating substantial profits is programming their mind to notice opportunities, make better decisions, and maintain motivation through inevitable challenges. Marden shares the remarkable story of a young woman who grew up in extreme poverty, the daughter of alcoholic parents, with every external indicator suggesting she was destined for a life of hardship and limitation. But this young woman discovered something powerful. She could close her eyes and create any reality she wanted in her mind. She began spending time each day visualizing a different life, seeing herself in beautiful clothes, living in a comfortable home, surrounded by books and culture, traveling to distant places, making a meaningful contribution to the world. Her current circumstances hadn't changed. She was still living in poverty, still dealing with family dysfunction, still facing tremendous obstacles. But something fundamental had shifted inside her. She no longer identified with her circumstances. Her mental images of success were more real to her than her physical circumstances. This internal shift began to manifest externally. She became more resourceful, more determined, more creative in finding ways to improve her situation. She pursued education with unusual intensity, worked multiple jobs, and maintained an unwavering focus on her vision. Years later, she had achieved everything she had visualized and more. She became a successful educator, traveled extensively, lived comfortably, and dedicated her life to helping other young people escape poverty. When asked about her journey, she always emphasized that the external journey began with an internal one. The images she held in her mind became the blueprint her life followed. One of the most challenging aspects of maintaining positive, empowering thoughts is dealing with the influence of other people. Marden dedicates significant attention to this issue because he recognizes that we're social creatures, deeply affected by the thoughts, opinions, and attitudes of those around us. If you're surrounded by people who think small, who embrace limitation, who criticize ambition, and who dismiss possibility, maintaining empowering thoughts becomes exponentially more difficult. This doesn't mean you should abandon everyone who doesn't think the way you do, but it does mean you need to be conscious about whose thoughts you allow to influence your own. Marden suggests actively seeking out people who think bigger, who embrace possibility, who support your growth, and who challenge you to expand your vision. These people don't have to be in your immediate physical environment. They can be authors, speakers, historical figures whose biographies you read, or online communities of like-minded individuals. Equally important is learning to shield your mind from the barrage of negativity that pervades much of modern discourse. The news media, social media, and casual conversation are often dominated by complaints, criticisms, fears, and limitations. While it's important to be informed about the world, it's equally important to recognize that consuming a steady diet of negativity is poisoning your mental atmosphere. Marden advocates for being highly selective about what you allow into your consciousness, treating your mind as sacred ground that should only receive seeds you actually want to grow. The book explores the fascinating relationship between thought and health. Marden was ahead of his time in recognizing what medical research has since confirmed. Our thoughts directly affect our physical well-being. Chronic stress, anxiety, and negative thinking patterns create measurable changes in our physiology. Elevated cortisol levels, suppressed immune function, increased inflammation, and a host of other problems. Conversely, positive emotions and empowering thoughts enhance immune function, improve cardiovascular health, and even affect how quickly we heal from injuries. Marden shares numerous examples of people who overcame serious health challenges through changing their thinking. He's careful to note that positive thinking isn't a substitute for proper medical care, but it's an incredibly powerful complement to it. The person who thinks of themselves as sick, who identifies with their disease, who constantly focuses on symptoms and limitations, is working against their own healing. The person who thinks of themselves as fundamentally healthy, who views illness as temporary, who focuses on vitality and recovery, is supporting their body's natural healing mechanisms. One particularly striking example involves a man who was diagnosed with a serious illness and given a grim prognosis. Instead of accepting this as his fate, he made a conscious decision about how he would think about his situation. Rather than thinking of himself as a sick person fighting disease, he thought of himself as a healthy person whose body was actively healing. He spent time each day visualizing his body strong and vibrant, his immune system powerfully attacking any diseased cells, his organs functioning perfectly. He combined this mental work with the best medical treatment available and made lifestyle changes that supported healing. The outcome was remarkable. He not only survived but thrived, eventually outliving his prognosis by decades. His doctors were initially skeptical of his emphasis on mental attitude, but they couldn't deny the results. This man became a passionate advocate for the power of thought in healing, always emphasizing that he wasn't suggesting people ignore medical science but rather that they should combine it with the tremendous healing power of the mind. Marden addresses a question that many readers naturally have. If thinking is so powerful, why doesn't everyone who thinks positive thoughts achieve success? This is a crucial question, and Marden provides a nuanced answer. First, he explains that simply having occasional positive thoughts while maintaining fundamentally negative thought patterns doesn't work. It's not about affirmations you repeat while secretly disbelieving them. It's about genuinely transforming your habitual thought patterns at a deep level. Second, positive thinking must be combined with appropriate action. Thinking you can succeed at something you never attempt is just daydreaming. The power of thought is that it drives you to take action, helps you persist through difficulties, enables you to recognize opportunities, and attracts support from others. The thought is the seed, but you still must water it, provide sunlight, and remove weeds. You can't just plant seeds and expect a harvest without any further effort. Third, there's often a time lag between changing your thoughts and seeing external results. The person who has spent 20 years thinking thoughts of poverty and limitation can't expect to think wealthy thoughts for a week and suddenly become rich. But if they persist in those wealthy thoughts, gradually transforming their mental atmosphere, they will absolutely see their circumstances begin to shift. The key is maintaining the new thought patterns long enough for them to take root and produce visible fruit. Marden also emphasizes that success doesn't always look the way we initially envision it. Sometimes what we think we want isn't actually what's best for us, and the universe has a way of giving us what we need rather than what we think we want. The person who maintains empowering thoughts of success, contribution, and growth will absolutely create a successful life, but it may not follow the exact script they initially wrote. This requires flexibility, trust, and willingness to recognize that the path to success often includes unexpected turns. The book contains an extensive discussion of persistence and how it relates to thought. Marden argues that persistence isn't primarily about willpower or discipline. It's about maintaining empowering thoughts in the face of discouragement. The person who thinks, "This is impossible," will naturally give up when things get difficult. The person who thinks, "This is difficult but achievable," will naturally persist. The thought creates the emotion, which drives the behavior. This is why understanding the power of thought is so critical for anyone pursuing ambitious goals. Difficulty and setbacks are inevitable. The question isn't whether you'll face obstacles but how you'll think about them when you do. The person who interprets setbacks as evidence of impossibility will quit. The person who interprets setbacks as feedback and learning opportunities will persist. Same setbacks, different thoughts, completely different outcomes. Marden shares the inspiring story of a man who attempted to build a business and failed 3 times. Each failure cost him everything: his savings, his reputation, his confidence. After the 3rd failure, he was at a crossroads. His family urged him to give up, to accept that entrepreneurship wasn't for him, to get a regular job and play it safe. Most people in his position would have agreed. 3 failures seemed like clear evidence that he wasn't cut out for business. But this man made a different interpretation. He thought deeply about what each failure had taught him. He realized that each attempt had been better than the last, that he was learning invaluable lessons, that he was developing capabilities he hadn't possessed before. Most importantly, he maintained his belief that he could succeed. He didn't think, I've failed 3 times, I'm a failure. He thought, I've learned from 3 experiences, and I'm now better prepared than I've ever been. He started a 4th business, incorporating everything he'd learned. This time, it succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Within 10 years, he had built a thriving enterprise that provided employment to hundreds of people and generated substantial wealth. When interviewed about his success, he always emphasized that the difference between the 4th attempt and the first 3 wasn't primarily about business strategy or market conditions. It was about how he thought about challenges and setbacks. The book explores the subtle but crucial difference between confidence and arrogance. Some people misunderstand the message of positive thinking, believing it means developing an inflated ego or pretending to know everything. Marden clarifies that true confidence comes from recognizing your potential and trusting in your ability to learn and grow, not from pretending you've already arrived or that you have nothing more to learn. The truly confident person is actually quite humble because they're secure enough to acknowledge mistakes, accept feedback, and continuously improve. They think, I can learn this, not, I already know this. They think, I'll figure this out, not, this should be easy for me. This kind of confidence is attractive and effective because it's grounded in reality while still being empowering. Arrogance, on the other hand, comes from insecurity. The arrogant person needs to pretend they're better than they are because deep down they doubt their adequacy. Their thinking is actually negative. They think, I must appear superior to hide my inadequacy. This is exhausting, alienating, and ultimately self-defeating. True confidence built on empowering thoughts doesn't need to announce itself or diminish others. It simply shows up as competence, reliability, and steady progress. Marden dedicates considerable attention to the power of words, explaining that words are the primary way we shape our thoughts. The language we use to describe ourselves, our circumstances, and our possibilities directly influences how we think and therefore what we create. Someone who constantly says, I can't afford it, is programming their mind for poverty. Someone who says, how can I afford it, is programming their mind for creative problem solving and wealth creation. This isn't just semantics or political correctness. It's about recognizing that language shapes thought, which shapes reality. The person who describes themselves as just a secretary versus an administrative professional who keeps this organization running smoothly is creating completely different mental atmospheres, which will lead to completely different opportunities and outcomes. The person who says, I have to go to work, versus, I get to work on meaningful projects, is creating different emotional states, which affect performance and satisfaction. Marden suggests conducting an audit of your habitual language. Listen to how you talk about yourself, your work, your relationships, your finances, your health, and your possibilities. Are you using language that empowers or language that limits? Are you describing yourself as you currently are or as you're becoming? Small changes in language can produce profound shifts in thinking over time. He shares the example of a teacher who was frustrated with a difficult class. She constantly thought of them as problem students and described them to colleagues using language like, these kids are impossible, they have no respect, and I can't do anything with them. Predictably, her experience with the class was miserable, and their behavior was consistently poor. Then a mentor challenged her to change her language for 1 month. Instead of problem students, she would think of them as students with untapped potential. Instead of they have no respect, she would think they're still learning appropriate behavior. Instead of I can't do anything with them, she would think I'm discovering what methods work best for them. The change in her language felt awkward at first, almost dishonest, because it didn't match her current experience. But she committed to the experiment. Over the course of that month, something remarkable happened. Her changed language began to change her thoughts, which changed her emotions, which changed her behavior toward the students. She approached them with more patience, creativity, and genuine belief in their potential. And they responded. By the end of the semester, they were one of her best classes. The students hadn't fundamentally changed. Her thoughts about them had, which changed everything. The book contains powerful insights about overcoming past conditioning. Many people struggle with empowering thoughts because they've been conditioned since childhood to think small, to doubt themselves, to play it safe, to accept limitation. Parents, teachers, peers, and society at large often inadvertently program us with limiting beliefs. Don't get your hopes up, be realistic. Who do you think you are? People like us don't do things like that. These messages, repeated over years, become the default thought patterns that run our lives. Marden offers hope and practical guidance for anyone seeking to overcome this conditioning. First, he emphasizes that it's never too late to reprogram your mind. Your brain remains plastic throughout your life, capable of forming new neural pathways and abandoning old ones. The limiting beliefs you've carried for decades can be replaced with empowering ones, but it requires conscious, consistent effort. The process begins with awareness. You must become conscious of your limiting beliefs, many of which operate below the level of conscious awareness. When you experience fear, self-doubt, or a sense of impossibility, ask yourself, what belief is creating this feeling? Often you'll discover beliefs you didn't even know you held. I'm not worthy of success. Good things don't happen to people like me. I'm not smart enough to do that. Once you've identified these beliefs, you can begin the work of replacing them. Marden recommends a practice of systematic belief replacement. Write down your limiting beliefs, then write empowering alternatives. I'm not worthy of success becomes, I'm worthy of all good things. Good things don't happen to people like me becomes, I attract positive opportunities and experiences. I'm not smart enough becomes, I have the intelligence to learn whatever I need to know. Then, you deliberately practice thinking the new beliefs, especially when old beliefs arise. This isn't instant or easy. You're literally rewiring neural pathways that have been reinforced for years or decades. But it's absolutely possible. Every time you consciously replace a limiting thought with an empowering one, you're weakening the old pathway and strengthening the new one. Over time, the empowering thoughts become more automatic while the limiting thoughts lose their power. One of the most touching examples in the book involves a woman who had been told throughout her childhood that she was ugly, stupid, and would never amount to anything. These messages came from an abusive parent, but they sank deep into her subconscious, shaping her entire life. She lived small, accepted poor treatment, and never pursued her dreams because deep down, she believed she didn't deserve better. In her 40s, she encountered Marden's philosophy and began to understand that these beliefs weren't truth. They were programming that could be changed. She began the difficult work of replacing those beliefs. Every time she caught herself thinking, I'm ugly, she would consciously think, I'm attractive and deserving of respect. Every time she thought, I'm stupid, she would think, I'm intelligent and capable of learning. Every time she thought, I'll never amount to anything, she would think, I'm creating a meaningful, successful life. The transformation took years, not days or weeks. But gradually, her entire life changed. She went back to school, earned a degree, started a career she loved, developed healthy relationships, and discovered abilities she never knew she had. The most remarkable part wasn't the external changes, though those were dramatic, it was the internal change. She genuinely came to see herself differently. The old beliefs that had haunted her for decades lost their grip, replaced by beliefs that empowered and liberated her. Marden addresses the spiritual dimension of thought, explaining that many religious and philosophical traditions have recognized the creative power of consciousness. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, says the ancient proverb. Ask and you shall receive. Knock and the door will be opened. These aren't just nice sayings. They're recognizing fundamental principles of how consciousness interacts with reality. He's careful not to advocate for any particular religious tradition, recognizing that readers come from diverse backgrounds. But he emphasizes that there's a spiritual component to thought that transcends mere psychology or neuroscience. When we think empowering, elevated thoughts, we're not just changing our brain chemistry. We're aligning ourselves with creative forces in the universe that support growth, development, and the realization of potential. This doesn't require belief in any particular conception of God or spirituality. Even from a purely secular perspective, we can recognize that consciousness appears to be fundamental to reality in ways we're only beginning to understand. Quantum physics has revealed that the observer affects what is observed. Psychology has shown that our beliefs and expectations literally shape our experience. Neuroscience has demonstrated that our thoughts create physical changes in our brain structure. Whether you understand this through religious faith, spiritual philosophy, or scientific curiosity, the practical implication is the same. Your thoughts matter more than you've been taught to believe. They're not just private internal experiences. They're creative forces that shape your health, relationships, career, and overall life trajectory. The book provides extensive guidance on developing specific successful thought patterns. For financial success, Marden emphasizes thinking thoughts of value creation, service, and abundance rather than thoughts of scarcity, competition, and lack. The person who thinks, "There's not enough to go around," creates completely different financial results than the person who thinks, "There's unlimited opportunity to create value for others." For relationship success, he emphasizes thinking thoughts of appreciation, understanding, and growth rather than thoughts of criticism, blame, and stagnation. The person who thinks of their partner's flaws creates a completely different relationship than the person who thinks of their partner's strengths. Same person, different thoughts, different relationship. For health and vitality, he emphasizes thinking thoughts of energy, strength, and wellness rather than thoughts of fatigue, weakness, and disease. The person who thinks, "I'm tired," throughout the day creates different energy levels than the person who thinks, "I'm energized and capable." For personal growth and learning, he emphasizes thinking thoughts of capability, progress, and curiosity rather than thoughts of limitation, stagnation, and disinterest. The person who thinks, "I can't learn new things at my age," creates different learning outcomes than the person who thinks, "I'm constantly growing and developing new capabilities." In each area, Marden provides specific examples and practical exercises for developing more empowering thought patterns. He emphasizes that this isn't about denying current reality but about focusing your mental energy on the reality you want to create rather than the reality you want to escape. One of the most practical sections of the book deals with morning and evening routines. Marden explains that the thoughts you think first thing in the morning and last thing before sleep are especially powerful because they're deposited directly into your subconscious mind when it's most receptive. The person who wakes up thinking, "I don't want to go to work," or "another difficult day ahead," is programming their subconscious for a difficult, unsatisfying day. The person who wakes up thinking, "I'm grateful for another day of opportunities," or "I'm excited about what I'll accomplish today," is programming their subconscious for a fulfilling, productive day. Similarly, the thoughts you think as you're falling asleep seed your subconscious mind for the night and the following day. The person who falls asleep reviewing everything that went wrong, worrying about problems, or thinking fearful thoughts is giving their subconscious mind negative material to work with. The person who falls asleep thinking grateful thoughts, reviewing successes, or visualizing desired outcomes is giving their subconscious positive material to work with. Marden recommends establishing deliberate morning and evening thought routines. Upon waking, before checking your phone or engaging with the world, spend at least 5 minutes consciously directing your thoughts toward what you're grateful for, what you're excited about, and what kind of day you intend to create. Before sleeping, review the day's successes, express gratitude, and visualize your desired future. These simple practices, done consistently, create profound changes in your mental atmosphere and therefore your life circumstances. The book doesn't shy away from addressing major challenges and tragedies. What about when you face genuine hardship, the loss of a loved one, a serious illness, a major financial setback? How do you maintain empowering thoughts in the face of real difficulty? Marden's answer is nuanced and compassionate. He's not suggesting that you deny grief, pretend hardship isn't real, or bypass genuine emotional processing. But he does emphasize that even in difficulty, you have a choice about how you think about your situation. The person who thinks, "This has destroyed me, I'll never recover," creates a very different future than the person who thinks, "This is incredibly difficult, but I will eventually find meaning in it and become stronger through it." The person who thinks, "Why is the universe against me?" creates different outcomes than the person who thinks, "What is this experience teaching me?" You can acknowledge pain and difficulty while still maintaining thoughts that support your eventual recovery and growth rather than permanent defeat. Marden shares the profound example of a man who lost his entire family in a tragic accident. The grief was overwhelming, and for a time, he understandably thought thoughts of despair and hopelessness. But gradually, with support and inner work, he made a conscious decision about how he would think about this tragedy. He decided he could honor his family's memory by becoming bitter and closed, or he could honor it by becoming more compassionate and using his experience to help others who face similar loss. This wasn't about pretending the tragedy didn't matter or trying to see it as somehow good. It was about consciously choosing thoughts that would support healing and meaningful living rather than permanent despair. Over time, he became a counselor helping others navigate grief, and he consistently testified that the difference between people who eventually find their way through tragedy and those who remain stuck isn't about the severity of the tragedy, it's about how they think about it. Throughout the book, Marden emphasizes the importance of taking responsibility for your thoughts. This is both empowering and sobering. It's empowering because it means you're not a victim of circumstances, you have the power to change your life by changing your thinking. It's sobering because you can no longer blame your circumstances, your past, or other people for your current situation. If your life isn't what you want it to be, and you understand the principles in this book, you must look at your own habitual thought patterns. This isn't about inducing guilt or shame, it's about recognizing your power. The person who blames circumstances is essentially saying, "I'm powerless." The person who takes responsibility for their thoughts is saying, "I have the power to create change." Which position would you rather occupy? Marden also addresses the role of purpose and meaning in sustaining empowering thoughts. It's much easier to maintain positive thinking when you're connected to a larger purpose beyond yourself. The person who thinks of their work as just a job will have a much harder time maintaining empowering thoughts about it than the person who thinks of their work as my contribution to making the world better. The person who thinks of challenges as obstacles to my comfort will respond differently than the person who thinks of challenges as opportunities to develop capabilities I'll use in service of my mission. He encourages every reader to clarify their sense of purpose, not in grandiose terms necessarily, but in genuine terms. What contribution do you want to make? What do you want to be remembered for? What values do you want to embody? When your daily thoughts and actions are connected to larger meaning and purpose, everything becomes easier. You naturally think more empowering thoughts because you're focused on something beyond your own immediate comfort or gratification. The book contains illuminating discussions about the relationship between thought and opportunity. Marden challenges the common notion that opportunity is primarily a matter of luck or being in the right place at the right time. Instead, he argues that opportunity is largely a matter of recognition. The same circumstances that one person sees as ordinary, another person sees as opportunity. The difference isn't in the circumstances but in how they're perceived, which is a function of thought. The person whose thoughts are focused on limitation and impossibility literally cannot see opportunities that are right in front of them. Their mental filter screens them out. The person whose thoughts are focused on possibility and creative problem solving notices opportunities everywhere because their mental filter is tuned to recognize them. This explains why successful people often seem to have good luck. They're not actually luckier. They're just better at recognizing and acting on opportunities because their thought patterns support this recognition. When you change your habitual thoughts, you don't just change how you feel. You change what you notice, which changes what opportunities you can act on, which changes your results. Marden illustrates this with the example of two people who both lose their jobs in the same company layoff. The first person thinks, "This is terrible. I'll never find another job. The economy is bad. I'm too old." These thoughts create a mental state of despair and paralysis. They half-heartedly send out a few resumes, approach interviews with barely concealed desperation, and eventually settle for a job they dislike, confirming their belief that they have limited options. The second person, facing the identical situation, thinks differently. This is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to find something better. I have valuable skills and experience. The right opportunity is out there waiting for me. These thoughts create a mental state of possibility and energy. They actively network, approach their job search strategically, present confidently in interviews, and eventually land a position that's actually better than the one they lost. Same external situation, different thoughts, completely different outcomes. This is the power Marden is illuminating throughout the book. Not that thinking changes external reality directly, but that thinking changes how we perceive, interpret, and respond to reality, which ultimately changes what we create and experience. As the book progresses, Marden addresses increasingly subtle aspects of thought control and mental mastery. He explores the concept of mental momentum, explaining that thoughts build upon themselves in powerful ways. A single negative thought can spiral into a cascade of negative thinking if left unchecked, creating what he calls mental avalanches. Conversely, a single positive thought, consciously maintained and built upon, can create powerful upward spirals of optimism, energy, and creative insight. This is why it's so important to catch negative thoughts early, before they gain momentum. The person who notices themselves thinking, "I'm having a bad day," and immediately redirects to, "I'm turning this day around," can prevent hours of negative mental momentum. But the person who indulges that first negative thought, adding to it with, "Everything always goes wrong for me," "I knew this would happen," and "things never work out," creates a mental avalanche that affects their mood, energy, decisions, and interactions for the rest of the day or longer. Marden emphasizes that this isn't about toxic positivity or pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It's about managing your mental state effectively. You can acknowledge that something didn't go as planned while consciously choosing not to spiral into catastrophic thinking about it. You can feel disappointed without declaring yourself a victim of fate. You can notice a problem without deciding the entire day, week, or life is ruined. The book explores the fascinating interplay between thought and habit. Marden explains that habits are simply thoughts that have become automatic through repetition. The person who habitually procrastinates isn't fundamentally lazy. They've simply repeated the thought, "I'll do it later," so many times that it's become automatic. The person who habitually acts decisively isn't fundamentally more courageous. They've repeated the thought, "I'll handle this now," enough times that it's become automatic. This understanding is incredibly empowering because it means that changing habits isn't primarily about willpower. It's about changing the underlying thoughts that drive the habits. When you address habits at the thought level rather than just trying to force behavioral change through discipline alone, the change becomes much more sustainable and natural. Marden provides a detailed methodology for habit change through thought transformation. First, identify the thought that drives the unwanted habit. The habit of overeating might be driven by the thought, "Food will make me feel better." The habit of avoiding difficult conversations might be driven by the thought, "Conflict is dangerous." Once you've identified the driving thought, you create an alternative thought that would drive a better habit. Movement and accomplishment make me feel better. Difficult conversations lead to growth and resolution. Then, the critical work begins. Every time you catch yourself thinking the old thought, you consciously replace it with the new one. You don't wait until you're engaging in the habit. You work at the thought level, before the habit is triggered. Over time, the new thought becomes as automatic as the old one was, and the new habit flows naturally from it. You haven't forced yourself to change through sheer discipline. You've reprogrammed the thought that drives the behavior. One of the most inspiring examples Marden shares involves a man who struggled with severe procrastination his entire adult life. He had tried every time management system, every productivity technique, every form of external accountability, but nothing created lasting change. He would make progress for a few days or weeks, then inevitably slide back into his old patterns. The problem was that he was addressing the behavior without addressing the underlying thoughts. When this man encountered Marden's philosophy, he began examining the thoughts behind his procrastination. He discovered a complex web of beliefs. If I try and fail, it proves I'm inadequate. As long as I haven't tried, I can still imagine I would have succeeded. Delaying gives me temporary relief from anxiety. These thoughts had been running automatically for so long that he hadn't even been aware of them, but they were driving his behavior far more powerfully than any time management technique. He began the painstaking work of replacing these thoughts. Trying and learning is success, regardless of the outcome. Imagining success without attempting it is empty. Taking action relieves anxiety far more effectively than delaying. He didn't try to force himself to stop procrastinating through discipline. He just kept replacing the thoughts whenever they arose. Gradually, remarkably, the procrastination simply dissolved. It wasn't that he developed superhuman willpower. The thoughts that drove procrastination were no longer dominant in his mind, so the behavior naturally changed. Marden delves into the concept of mental atmosphere in relationships, explaining that the thoughts you habitually think about another person create a tangible atmosphere that affects the entire relationship. The person who thinks critical, judgmental thoughts about their partner, even if they don't voice them, creates a cold, tense atmosphere. The partner feels this, even if they can't articulate what they're feeling, and naturally becomes defensive and withdrawn. This confirms the original negative thoughts, creating a destructive cycle. Conversely, the person who thinks appreciative, understanding thoughts about their partner creates a warm, accepting atmosphere. The partner feels safe, valued, and understood, and naturally becomes more open, affectionate, and cooperative. This confirms the positive thoughts, creating an upward spiral. The fascinating part is that this works even when the thoughts aren't expressed in words. The mental atmosphere communicates at levels beyond language. This doesn't mean ignoring real problems in relationships or pretending everything is perfect when it isn't. But it does mean being conscious of your habitual thoughts about the people in your life. Are you focusing on their flaws or their strengths? Are you replaying their mistakes or remembering their kindnesses? Are you thinking of them as obstacles to your happiness or as imperfect people trying their best? The thoughts you choose create the relationship you experience. Marden shares the touching story of a marriage that was on the verge of divorce. Both partners felt unloved, unappreciated, and convinced the other had changed for the worse. They were preparing to separate when a counselor suggested they try an experiment before making a final decision. For 30 days, each partner would consciously think only positive, appreciative thoughts about the other, not just avoid voicing criticism, but actually redirect their internal thoughts toward what they appreciated, valued, and respected about their partner. Both were skeptical, but they agreed to try. The first week was extremely difficult. Their habits of critical thinking were deeply ingrained, and it took constant vigilance to redirect their thoughts. But they persisted. By the second week, something began to shift. Each began to notice positive qualities in the other that they had forgotten or taken for granted. By the third week, the entire atmosphere of their home had changed. By the fourth week, they were both wondering why they had considered divorce. The problems that had seemed insurmountable a month earlier now seemed manageable. What had changed? Not their external circumstances, not their fundamental compatibility, not their past hurts. What changed was the mental atmosphere each was creating through their thoughts, and this changed everything else. They reported that this single practice saved their marriage and taught them something more valuable than any therapy technique: that they had far more control over the quality of their relationship than they had realized, simply through conscious management of their thoughts. The book contains profound insights about the thought patterns that create financial success. Marden challenges conventional thinking about money, arguing that poverty and wealth are primarily mental conditions that manifest as financial conditions. The person who thinks poor, who focuses on lack, who believes money is scarce, who resents others' wealth, who feels guilty about desiring financial security, will create poverty regardless of their income. The person who thinks wealthy, who focuses on abundance, who believes value can be created, who celebrates others' success, who feels worthy of prosperity, will create wealth regardless of their starting point. This doesn't mean that external factors don't matter or that systemic barriers don't exist. But it does mean that within whatever circumstances you find yourself, your thoughts about money will largely determine your financial trajectory. Two people can have identical incomes but completely different financial security based on how they think about money. One focuses on what they lack and spends impulsively to fill the emotional void, while the other focuses on what they have and manages it wisely. Marden explains that wealthy thinking isn't about being materialistic or greedy. It's about recognizing that money is a tool that can be used for good, that creating value for others deserves compensation, that financial security provides options and freedom, and that prosperity allows you to be more generous and helpful. The person who thinks money is bad, or rich people are corrupt, is subconsciously programming themselves to avoid wealth. The person who thinks money is a powerful tool for positive impact is opening themselves to financial abundance. One of the most practical examples in this section involves a woman who grew up in poverty and carried deep shame and negative associations about money. She believed that good people struggled financially, that focusing on money was shallow, and that she didn't deserve abundance. Predictably, despite working hard and making decent income, she always struggled financially. Money seemed to slip through her fingers, unexpected expenses constantly arose, and she lived with constant financial anxiety. When she discovered Marden's principles, She began examining her thoughts about money. She was shocked to discover how negative they were. She realized she was subconsciously sabotaging her own financial success because her identity was wrapped up in being someone who struggled with money. She began the work of changing these thoughts, replacing "I'm bad with money" with "I'm learning to manage money effectively, money is shallow," with "money is a tool I can use for good," and "I don't deserve abundance," with "I deserve financial security and the freedom it provides." The change wasn't instant, but it was dramatic. Within a year, she had built an emergency fund for the first time in her life. Within 2 years, she had paid off debts that had haunted her for a decade. Within 5 years, she had built substantial savings and investments. Her income had increased, but not dramatically. The primary change was in how she thought about and managed money. She had transformed her mental money atmosphere, and her external financial situation followed. Marden addresses the crucial role of gratitude in maintaining empowering thoughts. He explains that gratitude isn't just a nice feeling or polite gesture. It's one of the most powerful thought patterns you can cultivate. When you're genuinely grateful, you're focusing on what you have rather than what you lack, on opportunities rather than obstacles, on possibilities rather than limitations. This mental focus creates an emotional state that supports creativity, resilience, and positive action. The ungrateful person, no matter how much they have, will always find something to complain about. Their thoughts naturally gravitate toward what's wrong, what's missing, what's unfair. This creates a mental atmosphere of discontent that poisons their experience of life and alienates others. Even genuine blessings bring no satisfaction because their thought patterns immediately find the flaw or limitation. The grateful person, even if they have relatively little, finds reasons to appreciate their circumstances. Their thoughts naturally gravitate toward what's working, what's available, what's good. This creates a mental atmosphere of contentment and appreciation that enhances their experience of life and attracts support from others. Even genuine difficulties don't destroy their well-being because their thought patterns help them find meaning and lessons in challenges. Marden recommends establishing a daily gratitude practice as one of the most powerful tools for transforming your habitual thought patterns. Spend time each day consciously identifying things you're grateful for, not just major blessings but small everyday things. The more specific you can be, the more powerful the practice becomes. Don't just think, "I'm grateful for my health," but "I'm grateful that my legs carried me on a beautiful walk this morning," or "I'm grateful that my eyes allow me to read and learn." This practice isn't about ignoring problems or pretending everything is perfect. It's about training your mind to notice and appreciate the good that already exists in your life, which creates a mental foundation for attracting more good. The brain's reticular activating system filters reality based on what you focus on. When you regularly practice gratitude, you're training your brain to notice things to be grateful for, which fundamentally changes your experience of reality. The book explores the relationship between thought and courage. Marden argues that courage isn't an inherent personality trait that some people have and others lack. It's the natural result of certain thought patterns. The person who thinks, "I can handle whatever happens," naturally acts more courageously than the person who thinks, "I'll fall apart if things go wrong." The person who thinks, "Fear is a signal to act, not a reason to avoid," responds differently to fear than the person who thinks, "Fear means danger, I should retreat." This understanding is liberating because it means you don't have to wait to feel courageous before acting courageously. You can choose empowering thoughts about fear and challenge, and courageous action will flow naturally from those thoughts. The courageous person isn't someone who doesn't feel fear. They're someone who has trained themselves to think differently about fear. Marden provides specific thought patterns that support courage. This is uncomfortable but not dangerous. I can learn what I need to know. I've handled difficult things before and I'll handle this. The discomfort of action is less than the discomfort of regret. Growth requires leaving my comfort zone. When these become habitual thoughts, courage becomes habitual behavior. He shares the example of a man who had been paralyzed by social anxiety for most of his adult life. He desperately wanted to connect with others, to advance in his career, to fully participate in life, but the fear was overwhelming. Every social situation triggered thoughts of judgment, rejection, and humiliation. He had tried various therapies and techniques, but the fear remained dominant. When he encountered the principle that thoughts create emotional states, something clicked. He realized he was creating his own anxiety through his habitual thought patterns. Every social situation, he was thinking, "They're judging me. I'll say something stupid. They don't want me here. I'm going to be rejected." These thoughts created the anxiety, which created the awkward behavior, which sometimes led to the very rejection he feared, which confirmed his thoughts. He began consciously replacing these thoughts with alternatives. Most people are focused on themselves, not judging me. I have interesting things to contribute. I belong here as much as anyone. Connection is possible. These new thoughts felt false at first because his emotional state didn't immediately match them. But he persisted. Slowly, over months, his anxiety began to decrease. The new thoughts created less fear, which allowed more natural behavior, which led to better social experiences, which reinforced the new thoughts. 2 years into this practice, he could hardly recognize his former self. He had developed genuine friendships, advanced to a leadership position at work, and even started dating. The transformation wasn't that he no longer felt any social anxiety. It was that his default thought patterns no longer generated crippling fear. He had reprogrammed his mental responses to social situations, and everything changed. Marden dedicates significant attention to the power of mental pictures and visualization. He explains that the subconscious mind thinks primarily in images, not words, so the mental pictures you habitually hold have extraordinary power to shape your life. The person who constantly visualizes scenarios of failure, embarrassment, and defeat is programming their subconscious to move toward these outcomes. The person who regularly visualizes scenarios of success, contribution, and accomplishment is programming their subconscious to move toward these outcomes. This isn't magical thinking or wishful fantasy. It's working with the fundamental nature of how the mind functions. Every action you take is preceded by a mental image, even if you're not conscious of it. When you repeatedly visualize a particular outcome, you're essentially rehearsing it mentally, which prepares your entire system, neurological, emotional, and physical, to execute it in reality. Athletes have proven this principle through countless studies showing that mental practice produces measurable improvements in physical performance. The basketball player who visualizes making free throws actually improves their shooting percentage. The runner who visualizes perfect form improves their times. The same principle applies to any area of life. The businessperson who visualizes successful presentations gives better presentations. The parent who visualizes patient, loving interactions has more of them. Marden recommends establishing a daily visualization practice. Spend at least 5 to 10 minutes per day in a quiet space, eyes closed, vividly imagining your desired outcomes as if they've already been achieved. Don't just see the outcomes, involve all your senses. How does it feel? What do you hear? What are you saying? The more vivid and multi-sensory you make these mental pictures, the more powerfully they program your subconscious. He shares the remarkable story of a man who used visualization to recover from a severe injury that doctors said would leave him permanently disabled. The injury had crushed several bones in his leg, and medical experts agreed he would never walk normally again. But this man refused to accept this verdict as final. While his leg was healing, he spent hours each day visualizing himself walking, running, hiking, dancing, all the activities doctors said were impossible. He didn't just visualize abstractly, he made it as real as possible in his mind. He felt the ground beneath his feet, felt his muscles working correctly, felt the joy of unrestricted movement. His doctors and therapists were skeptical of this mental practice, but they couldn't deny his motivation to do the physical therapy exercises they prescribed. What they didn't realize was that his mental practice was actually priming his neuromuscular system, maintaining neural pathways that would have atrophied otherwise. His recovery defied all medical predictions. He not only walked again but ran marathons. His doctors called it miraculous, but he knew it was the power of the mental images he had held with such consistency and intensity. His subconscious mind had a clear picture of what was possible, and his entire system organized itself to make that picture reality. The book addresses the critical importance of present moment awareness in managing thoughts. Marden explains that negative, limiting thoughts tend to pull us into rumination about the past or anxiety about the future. The person dwelling on past mistakes or future worries is not actually present in the current moment, where life is actually happening and where they have actual power to act. Empowering thoughts, by contrast, tend to keep us anchored in present reality while maintaining a positive vision of the future. The person thinking, "I'm capable of handling this situation," or "I'm learning and growing right now," or "I choose to respond thoughtfully," is oriented toward present action rather than lost in past regrets or future fears. This doesn't mean ignoring lessons from the past or being unconcerned about the future. It means not allowing your mind to habitually escape the present moment, where your actual life is unfolding. The present is where you have power to choose your thoughts, power to take action, power to respond rather than react. When you're lost in past or future, you sacrifice this power. Marden recommends developing the habit of regularly bringing your awareness back to the present moment. Notice when your thoughts have drifted into rumination or worry, and gently redirect them to present reality. What are you doing right now? What do you see, hear, feel? What choice is available to you in this moment? This practice of present moment awareness becomes a foundation for all other forms of thought management. He illustrates this with the example of a woman who struggled with severe anxiety, constantly worrying about countless possible future catastrophes. Her mind was almost never in the present moment. It was always spinning elaborate scenarios of things that might go wrong. This mental habit was destroying her quality of life and her health. She couldn't enjoy present blessings because her mind was always elsewhere, manufacturing fear. A therapist taught her a simple practice. Whenever she noticed her thoughts spiraling into future worries, she would pause and consciously bring her awareness to the present moment by noticing 5 things she could see, 4 things she could touch, 3 things she could hear, 2 things she could smell, and 1 thing she could taste. This simple sensory exercise interrupted the worry pattern and anchored her in present reality. She practiced this dozens of times per day at first, because her habit of future-oriented worry was so strong. But gradually, over months, her mind became more naturally present-focused. The chronic anxiety that had plagued her for years significantly diminished. She realized that most of her suffering had been about imagined futures that never materialized, while her actual present moments were generally fine. By learning to keep her thoughts in the present rather than future catastrophe mode, she reclaimed her peace of mind. Marden explores the concept of mental contagion, explaining that thoughts are contagious in ways we don't fully understand but can clearly observe. When you spend time around people with negative, limiting thought patterns, You tend to absorb some of those patterns unless you're consciously protecting yourself. Conversely, when you spend time around people with positive, empowering thought patterns, those patterns tend to influence you positively. This is why it's so important to be conscious about what influences you allow into your mental atmosphere. The books you read, the media you consume, the conversations you participate in, the people you spend time with, all of these are depositing thoughts into your mind. Some of these deposits support your growth and empowerment. Others undermine it. You must become a vigilant guardian of your mental atmosphere, consciously choosing influences that support the thoughts you want to cultivate. This doesn't mean isolating yourself or only interacting with people who already think exactly as you do. But it does mean being strategic about major influences in your life. If you're trying to cultivate empowering thoughts about possibility and you're constantly surrounded by people who complain, criticize, and embrace victimhood, you're making your task unnecessarily difficult. Find people, even if only through books or online communities, who think the way you want to think. Marden shares the example of a young man trying to build a business while living with family members who were deeply skeptical of entrepreneurship. Every dinner conversation involved criticism of business owners, complaints about the economy, and assertions that people like us don't start successful companies. This constant negative input was like trying to fill a bathtub while the drain was open. No matter how much positive thinking he attempted, the negative influence of his environment was undermining it. He made a difficult but necessary decision to spend less time in these negative conversations and more time connecting with entrepreneurs, either in person or through books, podcasts, and online forums. His family felt rejected initially, but he explained that he needed to protect his mental atmosphere while he was building something important. The change in his mindset was dramatic. Without the constant input of limiting beliefs, his natural optimism and creativity flourished. His business succeeded in large part because he created a mental atmosphere that supported success rather than undermining it. The book contains valuable insights about the thought patterns that create health and vitality versus illness and depletion. Marden was remarkably prescient in understanding what modern psychoneuroimmunology has now confirmed. Our thoughts directly affect our physical health through complex pathways involving hormones, neurotransmitters, and immune function. The person who thinks constantly about illness, who identifies strongly with their health problems, who believes they're fragile or doomed to poor health, is literally suppressing their immune function and creating physiological stress that undermines healing. The person who thinks of themselves as fundamentally healthy, who views illness as temporary and body as resilient, who believes in their capacity for healing and vitality, is supporting immune function and creating physiological conditions that promote health. This doesn't mean that positive thinking cures all diseases or that ill people have caused their illness through bad thinking. Biology is complex, and many factors contribute to health and illness. But within that complexity, thought patterns play a significant role that medical science is only beginning to fully appreciate. Even when dealing with serious illness, the patient's thought patterns significantly affect their quality of life, their treatment response, and their outcomes. Marden provides specific thought patterns that support health. My body knows how to heal. I'm growing stronger every day. I have tremendous vital energy. My immune system is powerful and effective. I treat my body with respect and care. When these become habitual thoughts, they create physiological states that support health rather than undermine it. He recounts the story of two patients who received identical diagnoses of serious illness at the same time. The first patient immediately began thinking of himself as a sick person, resigned to suffering and decline. He talked constantly about his illness, identified completely with it, and expected the worst. His illness progressed rapidly, and his quality of life deteriorated significantly. The second patient made a different mental choice. She acknowledged the diagnosis but refused to identify with it. She thought of herself as a healthy person dealing with a temporary challenge. She visualized her body healing, spoke about her future plans with confidence, and maintained as much normalcy in her life as possible. She combined this mental approach with the best medical treatment available. Her illness still required serious treatment, but her response was dramatically better, her side effects less severe, and her quality of life remained surprisingly high. Eventually, she achieved full recovery, and her doctors noted that her attitude had clearly contributed to her positive outcome. As the book progresses toward its conclusion, Marden addresses the ultimate question: what is the highest use of this power of thought? Is it merely to achieve personal success, accumulate wealth, or enjoy better health? While these are all worthy goals, Marden argues for something more elevated. The highest use of thought is to align yourself with your deepest values, to contribute meaningfully to others, and to become the fullest expression of your potential. When your habitual thoughts are focused on contribution rather than just acquisition, on meaning rather than just pleasure, on growth rather than just comfort, you tap into motivational forces far more powerful than self-interest alone. The person whose thoughts are primarily, "What can I get?" will achieve less and enjoy it less than the person whose thoughts are primarily, "What can I contribute?" This isn't about self-sacrifice or martyrdom. It's about recognizing that human beings are naturally fulfilled by contribution, growth, and meaningful connection. The thoughts that lead to the deepest satisfaction are thoughts about how you can serve, how you can grow, how you can express your unique gifts in ways that benefit others. When you think these thoughts habitually, success becomes almost inevitable because you're aligned with fundamental human needs and values. Marden shares the inspiring example of a wealthy businessman who achieved everything he thought he wanted: financial success, luxury possessions, social status, but found himself deeply unsatisfied. Despite his success, his thoughts were often negative, anxious, and empty. He realized that his achievement, while impressive, felt hollow because it was focused entirely on personal acquisition rather than contribution. He made a pivotal decision to redirect his thoughts and his life toward meaningful contribution. He began thinking less about, "How can I make more money?" and more about, "How can I use my business to solve real problems and improve people's lives?" This shift in thinking transformed everything. His business actually became more successful financially, but more importantly, he found the fulfillment that had eluded him. His habitual thoughts were now focused on service and contribution, and this created a completely different quality of life experience. Marden emphasizes that you don't have to wait until you're successful to adopt this mindset. In fact, adopting this mindset is what accelerates success. The person who thinks, "I'll focus on contribution after I'm successful," is putting the cart before the horse. The person who focuses on contribution while pursuing success finds that success comes more easily and means more when it arrives. The book concludes with a call to immediate action. Marden stresses that understanding these principles intellectually is worthless unless you actually apply them. Reading about the power of thought while continuing to think the same limiting thoughts will produce no change whatsoever. You must consciously, deliberately, consistently practice directing your thoughts toward what you want to create rather than what you want to avoid. He recommends starting immediately with 3 specific practices. First, become aware of your habitual thought patterns. Spend a few days simply noticing what thoughts run through your mind most frequently, especially about yourself, your capabilities, your future, and your possibilities. Don't try to change them yet, just notice them. Most people are shocked to discover how negative their habitual thoughts actually are. Second, Choose 3 empowering thoughts that directly counter your most limiting beliefs. If you habitually think, "I'm not good enough," choose to consciously think, "I'm capable and growing stronger every day." If you think, "Nothing ever works out for me," choose, "I'm learning to create positive outcomes." If you think, "I'm stuck in these circumstances forever," choose, "I'm actively creating the life I want to live." Write these down and commit to practicing them consciously throughout each day. Third, establish a morning and evening thought routine. Spend the first 10 minutes after waking and the last 10 minutes before sleeping consciously directing your thoughts toward gratitude, desired outcomes, and empowering beliefs. These bookend periods, when your subconscious is most receptive, are premium real estate for thought planting. Use them wisely. Marden's final message is one of tremendous hope and possibility. He emphasizes that no matter where you currently are in life, no matter what mistakes you've made, no matter what limitations you've accepted, you can begin today to create something different through the power of your thoughts. You are not stuck. You are not doomed to repeat the past. You are not victim of circumstances. You have within you, right now, the power to transform your life through transforming your habitual thought patterns. This doesn't mean change will be instant or easy. You're working against years or decades of conditioning, and rewiring your mind takes time and consistent effort. But it is absolutely possible. Every person who has ever transformed their life from limitation to possibility, from failure to success, from despair to fulfillment, has done so by first transforming their thoughts. What they did, you can do. The title, "He Can Who Thinks He Can," encapsulates the entire philosophy in 6 simple words. Your capability is not fixed. It's directly related to what you believe about yourself. The person who thinks they can finds a way. The person who thinks they can't finds an excuse. Both are right, but one creates the life they want while the other creates the life they fear. Before we close, I want to encourage you to truly absorb what this book is teaching. This isn't just interesting philosophy or motivational fluff. This is a practical manual for life transformation. The principles Marden articulates have been proven countless times throughout history and are being validated by modern neuroscience and psychology. Your thoughts truly do create your reality, not through magic, but through the complex interplay of perception, emotion, decision-making, and action. If you found value in this summary of "He Can Who Thinks He Can," I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to Audiobook Library. We're committed to bringing you the wisdom of life-changing books in formats that fit your busy life. By subscribing, you'll ensure you never miss these transformative insights that can genuinely improve your life. Remember, success is not an accident. It's the natural result of thinking successful thoughts consistently over time. Health is not just luck. It's supported by thinking healthy thoughts. Relationships thrive when fed by appreciative, understanding thoughts. Financial security grows from abundant thinking. Personal growth springs from thoughts of possibility and capability. Starting today, right now, you can begin the most important work of your life, taking conscious control of your habitual thought patterns. You can begin replacing limiting thoughts with empowering ones. You can begin visualizing the life you want to create rather than replaying the life you want to escape. You can begin thinking thoughts worthy of the person you're capable of becoming. The power is in your hands, or more precisely, in your mind. Use it wisely, use it consciously, use it consistently, and watch as your external life gradually reshapes itself to match your internal transformation. You can, because you think you can. Now go prove it to yourself and the world. Thank you for spending this time exploring these powerful ideas with Audiobook Library. Until next time, keep thinking thoughts that empower you, uplift you, and move you toward the life you're meant to live.